the secret order that changed empires. The air in the Grand Master's study was thick with the scent of old parchment and beeswax. 75 years had passed since Valerius's sacrifice, and the Brotherhood had held true to its renewed oath. They were servants, not masters, but the world had not changed. Kings still waged pointless wars, merchants hoarded grain during famines, and the innocent suffered. Grandmaster Theron, whose weary eyes had seen too much, looked across his desk at the young man who represented the Brotherhood's future and its greatest temptation. Lorenzo was a prodigy, a master of finance who saw the world as a web of interconnected assets. Grandmaster, he said, his voice smooth, King Alaric of the Western Marches is weak. His treasure is empty, his army restless. His kingdom sits on the largest silver deposits on the continent. If we provide him with a significant loan, we can stabilize his rule, prevent a war, and save thousands of lives. And in return? Theron asked, his voice a low rumble. We secure the rights to his mines as collateral, Lorenzo said, his eyes gleaming. We don't take them. We simply manage them, ensure the silver flows, and the kingdom prospers. We become the silent guarantor of their stability. It is the ultimate expression of the founder's oath, to protect the innocent on a scale they could only dream of. Theron leaned back, the weight of history pressing on him. He remembered the stories of the Ledger of Whispers, of the power that had corrupted Valerius. What you propose is a dangerous path, Lorenzo. The path of control, not service. It is the path of pragmatism, Lorenzo countered. We cannot feed the hungry with ideals or stop armies with prayers. But with wealth, we can do anything. Let me show you what is possible. Theron was silent, looking at the reports of famine and war on his desk. He had spent his life fighting these fires one at a time. Lorenzo offered a way to control the fire itself. With a heavy heart, he gave a single slow nod. Approved. But be warned, Lorenzo, the line between protection and control is thinner than a razor's edge. The new ledger was not a book. It was a vast, circular chamber in the heart of the Brotherhood's new headquarters in Antwerp. The walls were lined with thousands of scrolls, each representing a financial account, a political alliance, or a spy's report. At the center, scribes and analysts worked tirelessly, their quills scratching as they updated the intricate web of information that was the Brotherhood's new source of power. This was Lorenzo's creation. From this room, he could see the flow of grain from the east to the markets of the west, the movement of armies along the borders of rival kingdoms. It was a power that dwarfed the old Ledger of Whispers, built not on magic, but on information and wealth. For now, it was a power used for good. When a plague broke out, Lorenzo diverted shipments of medicine. When a harsh winter threatened famine, he bought up grain futures, stabilized the price, and arranged for its transport, all without anyone knowing who was responsible. He was a ghost in the machine of the world, a silent guardian. But the new ledger was more than a tool for charity. It was a weapon. From this room, Lorenzo could fund a rebellion, crash into currency, or expose a king's darkest secrets. He had the power to reshape the world, and he knew it. As he stood on the balcony overlooking the chamber, he felt not the weight of responsibility, but the thrill of absolute control. The founders had dreamed of protecting the innocent. He would build them an empire. In the archives, on level below, Alara felt a different kind of thrill. She was surrounded by the Brotherhood's true history, the journals of the founders, the records of their early struggles. A historian and keeper of the flame, she believed with all her heart in the oath renewed in the ashes of Valerius's reign. The Brotherhood was meant to be a shield, not a sword. Asked about organizing the archives, she noticed discrepancies, financial records that didn't add up, reports of political interventions that went beyond service. At the center of it was all Lorenzo. Today, she found something that truly disturbed her: coded messages detailing the takeover of King Alaric's silver mines. The language was cold, clinical, the language of a business transaction, not a mission of mercy. The Brotherhood was not managing the mines. They were absorbing them. They were becoming the very thing they had sworn to oppose. She took the records to her small study, her heart pounding. She knew she had to do something. To challenge Lorenzo would be career suicide, but to remain silent would be to betray everything she believed in. She looked at the founder's oath, framed on her wall. We swear to protect the innocent, to defy the darkness and to serve the people, not ourselves. The words were comfort and condemnation. She had to speak. Alara found Lorenzo on the balcony overlooking the new ledger, watching the scribes below like a king surveying his domain. His smile widened when he saw her. Alara, come to see how the real work is done. I came to ask you about this, she said, holding out the records of the silver mines. This is not service, Lorenzo. This is conquest. He glanced at the scrolls, his expression unreadable. It is stability. King Alaric was a fool who would have plunged his kingdom into war. We prevented that. We are ensuring the mines are run efficiently, that the workers are treated fairly, and the silver benefits the entire region. Is that not a greater good? At what cost, she countered. We are becoming a corporation, a bank, using our power to accumulate more power. The founders warned against this. Valerius fell because of this. Valerius fell because he was sentimental, Lorenzo said, his voice cold. He had power but was afraid to use it. I will not make that mistake. I will use this power to build a world where the innocent no longer needs our protection, because the systems themselves are just. If that requires us to become more than a charity, so be it. And who decides what is just? Alara asked. You? The council? We are supposed to be their servants, not their masters. A good master knows what is best for his servants, Lorenzo said, turning back to the chamber. You spend too much time with ghosts, Alara. The world has changed. The Brotherhood must change with it, or we will become irrelevant. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Alara stood there, the cold reality of his words washing over her. The Brotherhood was changing, and she was standing in the way. Alara left the new ledger chamber, Lorenzo's words echoing in her mind. A good master knows what is best for his servants. The logic of a tyrant, cloaked in benevolence. She retreated to the archives, her sanctuary, where the founder's vision still felt alive. She ran her fingers over the spines of ancient books, the leather worn smoothly by generations of hands. She pulled down a dusty tome, the journal of a founder named Kalin. We have failed, Kalin had written. We sought to build a shield for the innocent, but we forged a sword for the powerful. The ledger, our greatest creation, has become our greatest curse. It has given us the power to see all, to know all, to control all. And in doing so, it has blinded us to the one thing that truly matters, the human heart. Alara's eyes filled with tears. It was as if Kalin had spoken directly to her. He had seen the danger. He had warned them. And now Lorenzo was leading them down the same path with a new, more powerful ledger. She began to search the archives, not for stories of the past, but for tools for the future. She looked for records of the Brotherhood's failures, the moments their power had corrupted them, the lessons they had learned and forgotten. She would build a case so compelling that even Lorenzo would have to listen. She would become the architect of a different future for the Brotherhood, built on the foundations of its past. She was not alone. She had the ghosts of the founders on her side. Lorenzo, meanwhile, focused on a different kind of architecture. His private study was the polar opposite of the archives, sleek, modern, filled with maps and financial projections. He was building an empire and needed a blueprint. His current project was the Holy Roman Empire, a sprawling, chaotic collection of states ripe for the Brotherhood's influence. The current emperor was old and frail. His death would trigger an election between the 7 most powerful electors. Lorenzo saw the system's vulnerability. 7 men, that was all it would take to control the most powerful empire in the world. He had already begun his work. His agents had compiled detailed dossiers on each elector, their debts, ambitions, weaknesses, and secrets. He knew which ones could be bought, blackmailed, or neutralized. It was a dirty business, but Lorenzo believed the ends justified the means. A stable, unified empire, guided by the Brotherhood's benevolent hand, would be a beacon of peace. The cost, a few broken lives and a great deal of money, was a small price to pay. He had already chosen his man, Prince Alaric, a young, idealistic reformer who shared many of the Brotherhood's stated goals. Alaric was popular, charismatic, and most importantly, in debt. Lorenzo would finance his campaign, secure his election, and in return, Alaric would owe him everything. The prince would be a puppet, and Lorenzo the puppet master. Alara's research bore fruit. She discovered a forgotten protocol in the Brotherhood's charter, the Covenant of the Founders, a failsafe allowing any member to call for a secret tribunal if they believed the Brotherhood had strayed from its oath. The tribunal, composed of 3 respected elders, would have a binding judgment, even on the Grand Master. It was a powerful, dangerous tool. To invoke the covenant was to risk everything. If the tribunal ruled against her, she would be branded a traitor. But if they ruled in her favor, they could force a change in leadership. It was a gamble, but her only one. She spent weeks gathering evidence, building her case. She documented Lorenzo's financial dealings, his political manipulations, and his growing network of enforcers. She compiled a history of the Brotherhood's past failures, showing how power had corrupted them time and again. She prepared her argument, a passionate plea for the Brotherhood to remember its soul. Finally, she was ready. She went to the Grand Master and formally invoked the covenant. The old man looked at her with a mixture of sadness and respect. "You know what you are doing, Alara? You are lighting a fire that may consume us all." "I know," she said, her voice steady, "but sometimes a fire is necessary to burn away the rot." The Grand Master nodded slowly. "So be it. The tribunal will be convened. May the founders have mercy on us all." The news of the Emperor's failing health spread like a cold wind. For Lorenzo, it was the signal he had been waiting for. The game was about to begin. He summoned his chief operative in the imperial capital, a man named Matthias, to Antwerp. Matthias was a master of disguise, a whisper in the corridors of power, a man who could buy a secret or arrange an accident with equal skill. He was the perfect instrument for Lorenzo's plan. "The Emperor will be dead within the month," Lorenzo told him. "The election will follow. We need to ensure that Prince Alaric wins. I am giving you a budget of 1 million florins. Use it to buy votes, to spread propaganda, to do whatever is necessary. Failure is not an option." Matthias nodded. "And the other candidates? Duke Theron will not be easily defeated." "Duke Theron is a problem," Lorenzo admitted. "He is powerful, ruthless, and has his own network of spies. You will need to be careful. But he also has weaknesses. Find them, exploit them, and if necessary, remove him from the game." The unspoken meaning hung in the air. Remove him? It was a line the Brotherhood had not crossed in a generation. But Lorenzo was willing to cross it, and Matthias was the man to do it. He was a soldier, and he followed orders. "Consider it done," Matthias said, and left to begin his work. Lorenzo watched him go, a faint smile on his lips. The first piece was in play, prepared for a different kind of battle. The tribunal had been convened. The 3 elders who would judge her were men of immense prestige, deeply loyal to the Grand Master and the current leadership. To convince them would be a monumental task. She entered the secret chamber, her heart pounding. The room was small, circular, lit by a single candle. The 3 elders sat in high-backed chairs, their faces in shadow. The Grand Master and Lorenzo were also present, as was their right. Alara began to speak, her voice clear and strong. She laid out her case with precision and passion, presenting the financial records, the coded messages, the evidence of Lorenzo's power grabs. She spoke of the founder's oath, of the Brotherhood's history of corruption and redemption. She argued that they were once again on the path to ruin. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Lorenzo began to speak. He did not deny her accusations, but reframed them. They spoke of the good the Brotherhood had done with its wealth, of the wars prevented, the famines averted. He argued that power was not a corrupt force, but a tool, and that he was using that tool to build a better world. "Alara speaks of the past," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "I speak of the future, a future where the Brotherhood is not a passive observer, but an active participant in the shaping of history. A future where we do not simply react to the world's problems, but solve them." The tribunal deliberated for 2 days. The tension in the Brotherhood's headquarters was palpable. Everyone knew the future of the organization was being decided in that small, candlelit room. Finally, the verdict was delivered. The tribunal found that Lorenzo had, in fact, overstepped his authority. They acknowledged the danger of his methods and the validity of Alara's concerns. But they also acknowledged the undeniable good that had been achieved. Their judgment was a compromise. Lorenzo would be censured, his power curtailed. A new oversight committee, with Alara at its head, would be created to monitor the Brotherhood's financial and political activities. But the election project would be allowed to continue. The tribunal was not willing to abandon the chance to control an empire. Alara was disappointed, but not surprised. She had won a partial victory, a foothold from which she could continue her fight. But she had not won the war. Lorenzo was still in power, his plans still in motion. Lorenzo, for his part, was furious. He had been publicly rebuked, his authority challenged. He saw the Oversight Committee as an insult, a leash on his ambition. But he was a pragmatist. He had survived. His plan was still alive, and he would find a way to deal with Alara and her committee. The game had just become more complicated. With the tribunal's reluctant blessing, Lorenzo's plan moved forward. The first bribe was delivered to the Archbishop of Mainz, a man of God with a diocese drowning in debt. The Brotherhood's emissary made him an offer he could not refuse: financial salvation in exchange for his vote. The Archbishop wrestled with his conscience, but ultimately accepted. He rationalized it as men of power often do. He would use the money for good. He would vote for Alaric, who was the better candidate anyway. The bribe was simply a means to a noble end. But as he signed the secret contract, he felt a piece of his soul wither. He was not the only one. One by one, the electors were approached, their weaknesses identified, their price discovered. The Margrave of Brandenburg, a gambler with a mountain of debt, was bought easily. The Count Palatine, a man who feared change, was swayed by fabricated intelligence reports. The King of Bohemia, a man with a taste for luxury, was promised a lifetime of it. 4 of the 7 electors were now in the Brotherhood's pocket. The election was all but secure, but the cost was immense, not just in gold, but in the moral fabric of the Brotherhood itself. They had become what they once despised. Alara, as head of the new Oversight Committee, watched it all with growing despair. She had the authority to monitor, but not to stop. She was a record keeper of the Brotherhood's damnation, a witness to its fall. Duke Theron was not a man to be underestimated. He had his own spies and knew that something was amiss. He knew that Alaric, a prince with no resources, was suddenly flushed with cash. He knew that the electors were being courted with promises that could not be kept. He knew a hidden hand was moving the pieces. He launched his own investigation, a ruthless hunt for the truth. He hired a man known only as the Inquisitor, a master of secrets. The Inquisitor began to unravel Lorenzo's network, identifying his agents, tracing the flow of his gold, getting closer to the source. Lorenzo, alerted by his own spies, knew the Inquisitor was a threat that had to be eliminated. He sent an order to Matthias in Vienna: neutralize the threat. Use any means necessary. It was an order for assassination, a line the Brotherhood had not crossed in a generation. But Lorenzo was playing for the highest stakes. Matthias carried out the order with brutal efficiency. The Inquisitor was found dead in his office, a victim of a sudden illness. The official cause was a heart attack, but Theron knew better. He had been warned. The game was more dangerous than he had imagined. But the Inquisitor's death did not stop Theron's investigation. It only made him more determined. He now knew his opponent was a ruthless and shadowy organization. He would have to be just as ruthless in return. The death of the Inquisitor sent a chill through the Brotherhood. The reformers on the Oversight Committee were horrified. They had never imagined the election project would lead to murder. Alara confronted Lorenzo, her voice shaking with rage. "We are assassins now, Lorenzo? Is this what the Brotherhood has become?" Lorenzo was unmoved. "We are at war, Alara. In war, there are casualties. The Inquisitor was a threat to our mission, to the stability of the Empire. His death, while regrettable, was necessary, a small price to pay for the greater good." "The greater good?" Alara shot back. "Or your ambition, your desire for power?" "They are one and the same," Lorenzo said coldly. "I am building a better world, Alara, and I will not let anyone stand in my way." The battle lines were drawn, not just in the Empire, but within the Brotherhood itself. Alara and the reformers were now in open opposition to Lorenzo and his faction. The Grand Master, caught in the middle, tried to mediate, but it was too late. The Brotherhood was tearing itself apart, and outside the world was watching. The scandal of the election, the rumors of bribery, the death of the Inquisitor, it all began to leak out, poisoning the political atmosphere. The Brotherhood was no longer a secret. It was a target. The day of the election arrived. The 7 electors gathered in the ancient hall, their faces masked of solemnity and calculation. The air was thick with the weight of the scandal that had engulfed them all. Each man knew his vote would be scrutinized, debated, and remembered for generations. One by one, they cast their ballots. The Archbishop of Mainz, his hand trembling. The Margrave of Brandenburg, with a casual shrug. The Duke of Saxony, with a defiant flourish. The votes were counted, and the result announced. By a vote of 4-3, Prince Alaric is elected Holy Roman Emperor. A murmur ran through the assembled witnesses. It was the narrowest of victories. The Brotherhood had won, but barely. The cost of that victory was written on the faces of the electors. Alaric entered the hall, his face a mixture of joy and disbelief. He was young, handsome, the very image of a noble prince. But as he looked at the electors, he saw not loyalty, but fear and resentment. He had won the crown, but not their hearts. He was an emperor, but also a puppet. And somewhere in the shadows, the puppet masters were pulling the strings. 3 days after his coronation, Alaric received a visit from Lorenzo. The meeting was private, in the emperor's personal chambers. Lorenzo arrived with a small retinue and a large ledger, the physical manifestation of Alaric's debt. "Your Majesty," Lorenzo began, his tone respectful but firm. "I come to discuss the terms of our partnership." He opened the ledger. "This is what we spent to secure your election. The total comes to just over 2 million florins." Alaric's face went pale. "That is more than the imperial treasury holds in a year." "Indeed," Lorenzo said, "which is why we do not expect repayment in gold. Instead, we propose a different arrangement." He produced a contract. "We ask for certain concessions, control over the silver mines, exclusive trading rights in key ports, the appointment of Brotherhood-approved advisors to key positions in your government, and a seat on your imperial council." Alaric stared at the document. "You want to control my empire." "We want to help you rule it," Lorenzo corrected. "You are young, inexperienced, with enemies on all sides. We can protect you, guide you, ensure your reign is long and prosperous. All we ask is a voice in your decisions." Alaric wanted to refuse, but he knew he could not. He had sold his soul to win the crown. Now, he was simply paying the bill. He signed the contract. "I accept your terms. May God forgive me." Lorenzo took the contract, a faint smile on his lips. "God will forgive you, Your Majesty. History will remember you as a great emperor, and we will make sure of that." News of the contract spread quickly through the Brotherhood's network. Lorenzo had secured not just an election, but an empire. The Brotherhood now had direct control over vast resources, strategic positions, and the ear of the most powerful man in Europe. But not everyone celebrated. In the archives, Alara read the terms with growing horror. This was not partnership, it was conquest. The Brotherhood had not helped Alaric win. They had bought the throne, and now they owned it. She added the contract to her secret file, the growing catalog of the Brotherhood's sins. In Vienna, Duke Theron received word of the contract through his own intelligence network. He read it with a cold, calculating fury. He had lost the election, but the war was far from over. The Brotherhood had overreached, made themselves visible, vulnerable, and he would exploit that vulnerability. He summoned Lucien, his spy master. "The Brotherhood has made a fatal mistake," he said. "They have tied themselves to Alaric, publicly and irrevocably. If we can discredit Alaric, show that he is a puppet of a corrupt organization, we can turn the nobility against him. We can undo this election." "It will take time," Lucien warned, "and it will be dangerous." "Then let there be a fight," Theron said, his eyes hard. "I have spent my life on battlefields. I am not afraid of war. This time the enemy is a shadow, and shadows can be burned away by the light." The game was not over. It had only just begun. Vienna was a nest of vipers, and Brother Matthias had learned to move among them like a shadow. As the Brotherhood's chief operative in the imperial capital, his face could shift like water. Charming at court, menacing in the alleys, invisible when necessary. He had spent 5 years building a network of informants, blackmailers, and spies from the palace kitchens to the archbishop's private chambers. Now, Lorenzo had activated him to ensure Prince Alaric won the imperial election. Matthias waited in a crowded tavern, his hood pulled low. His contact arrived, a nervous clerk from Duke Theron's household who had been in the Brotherhood's pocket for 2 years. "What do you have for me?" Matthias asked, his voice a whisper. "The Duke knows," the clerk stammered. "He knows someone is funding Alaric." He's launched an investigation and brought in a man from the east, a hunter of secrets. They call him the Inquisitor. He's dangerous, Brother Matthias. He's already identified 3 of our informants. They've disappeared. Matthias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The operation was supposed to be invisible. But Theron was no fool. He was fighting back with brutal efficiency. What does the Inquisitor know? He knows the money is from Antwerp, funneled through merchants and bankers. He's following the trail. Brother, if he finds us, if he exposes the Brotherhood, the clerk's voice trailed off. Matthias placed a firm hand on the man's shoulder. He will not find us. We are ghosts. If he gets too close, we will deal with him. You have done well. Now go. The clerk nodded and vanished into the crowd. Matthias remained, his mind racing. The game had just become far more dangerous. Matthias sent an urgent, coded message to Lorenzo. The response came within days. Neutralize the threat. Use any means necessary. The order was expected, but it still made him uneasy. Any means necessary was the language of tyrants, not servants. But he was a soldier in a war, and wars required hard choices. He convened a meeting of his most trusted operatives in a safe house. There were 5 of them, men and women who had spent years in the shadows, gathering secrets and manipulating outcomes. They were the best at what they did, and what they did was often ugly. We have a problem, Matthias began. The Inquisitor is hunting us. He's good. He's already taken 3 of our people. If he continues, he will unravel our entire operation. We need to stop him. Stop him how? Asked Isolde, a master of poisons and accidents. Her question was practical, not moral. Permanently, Matthias said, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. Make it look like an accident. A robbery gone wrong. A fall from a horse. Something that won't raise suspicion. The room was silent. They all knew what was being asked. This was not intelligence gathering, it was assassination. Are we sure about this? Asked a young operative named Gregor. Killing a man in cold blood? This is not what we swore to do. We swore to protect the innocent, Matthias replied, his voice hard. If the Inquisitor exposes us, thousands will die in the wars that follow. We are preventing greater evil. He did not believe his own words, but he spoke with them with conviction. The operatives nodded, one by one. The decision was made. The Inquisitor would die. The Inquisitor's name was Casimir, a man who believed in order above all else. He had served Duke Theron for a decade, rooting out corruption and exposing conspiracies with methodical, relentless mercy. Now, he was closing in on the greatest conspiracy he had ever encountered. He sat in his small, austere office, surrounded by maps and reports. He had traced the flow of gold from Antwerp to Vienna through a dozen intermediaries. He was patient, he had time, and he was very good at his job. He had just identified the next link in the chain, a merchant banker named Otto who had distributed a large sum to several imperial electors. Otto was the key. If Casimir could make him talk, he could expose the entire network. He was planning his approach when a servant knocked. Enter, he called, not looking up. A servant entered with a cup of wine. Compliments of the Duke, sir, for your diligent work, Casimir frowned. The Duke was not a man given to such gestures, but he was tired, and the wine smelled excellent. He took the cup and drank deeply. Only as the room began to spin, his vision blurring, did he realize his mistake. The wine was poisoned. He tried to stand, to call for help, but his body would not obey. He collapsed, his papers scattered. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the servant's cold, expressionless face. The Brotherhood's reach was long, and its methods were ruthless. The Inquisitor had been neutralized. The game continued. The Archbishop of Mainz, Friedrich, was a man caught between heaven and earth. A scholar and theologian of deep faith, he was also the administrator of a vast diocese drowning in debt, a legacy of his predecessor's extravagance. He sat in his private chapel, praying for guidance, when the Brotherhood's emissary arrived. The man was well-dressed, soft-spoken, and carried an air of quiet authority. He introduced himself as a representative of a charitable organization from Antwerp. Your Grace, the emissary began, we are aware of the financial difficulties facing your diocese. We wish to help. We will provide funds to clear your debts, repair your churches, and feed the poor. In return, we ask only for your friendship and your wisdom in matters of state. Friedrich's eyes searched for deception. And what matters of state would require my wisdom? The imperial election, Your Grace. The choice between Prince Alaric and Duke Theron will shape the future of the Empire and the Church. We believe Prince Alaric is a man of faith who will protect the Church's interests. Duke Theron is a man of war who sees the Church as a tool. Friedrich knew this was true. He had met both men. Alaric was young and idealistic, but his heart was good. Theron was cunning, ambitious, and had little patience for the Church's teachings. The choice seemed clear. And if I were to support Prince Alaric, Friedrich asked carefully, what would this partnership entail? Your vote, Your Grace, and your influence. We will handle the rest. The employer placed a sealed contract on the table. This outlines our support. 50 years of funding, guaranteed. Enough to transform your diocese into a beacon of faith. Friedrich stared at the document, his heart heavy. It was a bribe, dressed in the language of charity, but it was also a lifeline, a chance to do immense good. Could he refuse, knowing the suffering it would prevent? Friedrich did not sign the contract that day. He asked for time to pray and consider. The emissary agreed but left the document behind, a constant, tempting presence on his desk. For 3 days, Friedrich wrestled with his conscience. He consulted the scriptures, prayed until his knees ached, and sought the counsel of his advisors without revealing the full truth. In the end, he came to a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would accept the Brotherhood's offer. Not because he was corrupt, but because he believed the good he could do with their money outweighed the moral compromise. He would vote for Alaric because he was the better choice. The money was simply a means to an end, a tool to serve God's will. He signed the contract, his hand trembling, and sent word to the emissary. The response was swift. Within a week, the first installment of gold arrived with detailed plans for the restoration of his diocese. The Brotherhood was efficient. They kept their promises. But as the weeks passed, Friedrich felt a growing unease. The emissary visited regularly, always polite, but with subtle reminders of their agreement. He was expected to speak favorably of Alaric in sermons, use his influence with other electors, and report any information he learned about Theron's campaign. He had become a spy, a puppet. He had sold his vote, and with it, a piece of his soul. He tried to rationalize it, but late at night, alone in his chapel, he could not escape the truth. He had been bought, and the price he feared was far higher than gold. The archbishop was not the only elector to receive the Brotherhood's offer. One by one, Lorenzo's emissaries visited the 7 men who would choose the next emperor, tailoring each offer to their specific weaknesses. The Margrave of Brandenburg, a gambler who had lost a fortune at cards, owed debts to half the moneylenders in Europe. The Brotherhood offered to clear his debts and provide a generous pension. He accepted without hesitation, his loyalty purchased as easily as a hand of cards. The Count Palatine, a cautious man who feared change, was swayed by fabricated intelligence reports showing that Theron planned to centralize power and strip the electors of their traditional privileges. Alarmed, the Count threw his support behind Alaric, the candidate who promised to preserve the old ways. The King of Bohemia, a man whose appetites were legendary, was offered a lifetime of pleasure: gold, women, exotic wines. He laughed, called the emissary a devil, and signed the contract with a flourish. And so it went. 4 of the 7 electors were secured, their votes bought and paid for. The election was a foregone conclusion, but the Brotherhood had paid a price as well. They had traded their honor for influence, their principles for power. They had become the very thing they had once sworn to destroy. And the ghosts of the founders wept. Duke Theron was a patient man, but his patience had limits. The Inquisitor's death had been a setback, but it had not stopped his investigation. He had simply become more careful. He hired a new spy master, Lucian, who was as cunning as if he was ruthless. And Lucian had found what they were looking for. He had found Otto, the merchant banker who had distributed the Brotherhood's gold to the electors. Otto was terrified, but Lucian had ways of making men talk. He offered Otto a choice: testify against the Brotherhood and receive the Duke's protection, or remain silent and face the consequences. Otto, fearing for his life, chose to talk. He told Lucian everything: the names of the bribed electors, the amounts they received, the secret contracts they had signed. He even provided copies of the contracts which he had made as insurance. Lucian brought the evidence to Theron, his face grim. "We have them," he said. "This is enough to destroy Alaric, expose the Brotherhood, and undo the entire election." Theron looked at the documents, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. "Excellent, but we will not simply expose them. We will humiliate them. We will turn their own methods against them. We will use the power of the press, the court of public opinion, to bring them down." He had a plan to not just defeat the Brotherhood, but to erase them from the pages of history. Theron's plan was simple and brutal. He would not present the evidence to the imperial court, where it could be buried in legal challenges. Instead, he would give it to the people. He had secretly founded a network of printers and pamphleteers across the empire, a new and powerful force that could spread information faster and wider than ever before. And they were hungry for a story. Theron gave them the story of a lifetime. He gave them Otto's testimony, the copies of the secret contracts, the details of the Brotherhood's conspiracy. He gave them everything. The pamphlets began to appear overnight in cities and towns across the empire. Printed on cheap paper, with sensational headlines and lurid illustrations, they told a story of a secret organization that had bought an emperor, a story of corruption, greed, and murder. They named names. They showed the evidence. They called for justice. The scandal exploded. The people, already suspicious of the election, were outraged. The nobility, resentful of Alaric's sudden rise, saw an opportunity to challenge his authority. The church, implicated through the Archbishop of Mainz, was thrown into turmoil. The Brotherhood was caught completely off guard. They had expected a political battle to be fought in the shadows. They had not expected to be tried in the court of public opinion, a court they could not control. In Antwerp, the inner council convened in a state of panic. The scandal was a disaster, a catastrophe that threatened to undo everything they had achieved. Their web of influence was unraveling, their reputation in tatters, their very existence at risk. Lorenzo, for the first time, seemed shaken. He had underestimated Theron and the power of public opinion. He had believed he could control the game, but it had spun out of his control. "What do we do?" the Grand Master asked, his voice heavy with despair. "We fight back," Lorenzo said, his voice regaining some confidence. "We deny everything. We claim the documents are forgeries, that Otto is a liar, that this is a smear campaign by a desperate rival. We use our own resources to counter their propaganda. We will not be brought down by a few pieces of paper." Alara listened and shook her head. "It's too late for that, Lorenzo. The truth is out, and the truth has a power that even you cannot control. We cannot lie our way out of this. The only way forward is to confess, to repent, to try to salvage what little honor we have left." "Confess?" Lorenzo scoffed. "And be destroyed? Is that your solution, Alara? To surrender?" "My solution is to be honest," she replied, "to be what we claim to be. A brotherhood of servants, not a cabal of liars and assassins." The council was divided, the two factions locked in a bitter, irreconcilable conflict. And as they argued, the fire that Theron had lit continued to spread. The scandal had a devastating effect on the Brotherhood's operations. Their agents, once protected by anonymity, were now exposed and hunted. Their allies, once eager to share in their wealth, now distanced themselves, fearing the taint of corruption. The new ledger, once a source of strength, was now a liability, a roadmap for their enemies. Matthias in Vienna found himself a man on the run. His network of spies was compromised, his safe houses discovered, his informants arrested or killed. He moved through the city like a ghost, changing his location every night, trusting no one. He was a hunter who had become the hunter. He received a desperate order from Lorenzo to contain the damage. But what damage could he contain? The fire was everywhere. He tried to silence the printers, but for every one he shut down, two more sprang up. He tried to discredit Otto, but the man was now under Theron's protection, his testimony repeated in 1,000 pamphlets. One night, Matthias was ambushed in a dark alley. He fought back, killing 2 of his attackers, but he was outnumbered. He was captured, beaten, and thrown into a dungeon. His war was over. His capture was a major blow to the Brotherhood. He was their most skilled operative in the imperial capital. And now he was in Theron's hands. The unraveling was accelerating. Alara, watching the Brotherhood crumble, knew she had to act. The Covenant Tribunal had been a partial victory, but it was not enough. The Brotherhood was still on a path to self-destruction, and only a radical change could save it. She went to the archives and retrieved the secret file she had been compiling, the catalog of the Brotherhood's sins. It was a heavy burden, a weight of evidence that could destroy them all, but it was also the only hope for their redemption. She requested a meeting with the Grand Master. She found him in his study, a broken man, staring at a map of the Empire as if it were a tombstone. "It's over, isn't it?" he said, his voice hollow. "Everything we built, it's all turning to dust." "Not yet," Alara said. "There's still a chance, but it will require a sacrifice." She laid the file on his desk. "This is everything. The bribes, the assassinations, the contracts, the full truth of what we have become. We need to release it. All of it. We need to confess our sins to the world and beg for their forgiveness." The Grand Master stared at the file, his face pale. "You want me to destroy the Brotherhood. I want you to save it," she replied. "We have lost our way. We have become monsters. The only way to kill the monster is to expose it to the light. We must choose to be what we were meant to be, even if it means losing everything we have gained." It was a terrible choice between survival and honor. The Grand Master had to decide which was more important. The Grand Master made his decision. He would not release the file. He would not destroy the Brotherhood. A man of tradition and loyalty, he could not bring himself to betray the organization he had served his entire life. He chose survival, but he also knew things could not continue as they were. He summoned Lorenzo and Alara to his study, a final attempt to broker peace between the two warring factions. "We are on the brink of annihilation," he said, his voice heavy with authority, "and we have no one to blame but ourselves. Lorenzo, your ambition has led us to this disaster. Alara, your idealism has exposed us to our enemies. You are both right, and you are both wrong. If we do not find a way to work together, we will all be destroyed." He proposed a new path. The Brotherhood would withdraw from the imperial election, cut their losses, abandon Alaric, and retreat into the shadows. They would go back to what they once were. Lorenzo was aghast. "Retreat? After everything we have sacrificed, we are on the verge of controlling an empire that is turning to ash in our hands," the Grand Master replied. "We have failed, Lorenzo. The sooner we accept that, the sooner we can begin to rebuild." Alara surprisingly agreed with Lorenzo. "We cannot retreat now. We have a responsibility to see this through, but we must do it differently. We must be honest about our methods and be prepared to face the consequences." It was a stalemate. The Grand Master could not unite them. The Brotherhood was broken, its leadership divided, its future uncertain. And as they argued, the world outside continued to burn. The capture of Matthias was a turning point. Under interrogation, he broke, telling Theron everything he knew: the names of the Brotherhood's agents, the locations of their safe houses, the details of their operations. He gave them the keys to the kingdom. Theron's forces moved swiftly. They launched a series of coordinated raids across the Empire, arresting dozens of Brotherhood operatives, seizing their assets, and dismantling their network. The Brotherhood, already weakened by scandal and internal conflict, was unable to fight back. It was a massacre. In Antwerp, the news of the raids was met with shock and despair. The Brotherhood was being systematically destroyed. The Grand Master, seeing his life's work turn to dust, fell into a deep depression, unable to lead. Lorenzo, however, was not a man to despair. He was a man of action. He saw the disaster not as an end, but as an opportunity. With the Grand Master incapacitated and the council in disarray, he seized control. He declared a state of emergency, assuming dictatorial powers. He would save the Brotherhood, even if he had to destroy it to do so. His first act was to order the assassination of Otto, the merchant banker who had betrayed them. It was a message to their enemies: we are still here and we are still dangerous. Alara was horrified by Lorenzo's seizure of power. He had become a tyrant, a new Valerius, and he was leading the Brotherhood to its doom. She knew she had to stop him, but she was powerless. The council was in chaos, the Grand Master broke, and Lorenzo's faction was now in control. She went to her allies, the other reformers on the Oversight Committee, and urged them to act. "We have to do something," she said. "We have to remove him from power." But they were afraid. Lorenzo had become ruthless, and they feared for their lives. They would not challenge him. Desperate, Alara decided to take matters into her own hands. She would not use the Covenant again. This time, she would use the Brotherhood's own methods against them. She would use the secrets she had gathered to expose Lorenzo and turn his own faction against him. She began to work in secret, contacting Lorenzo's allies, feeding them information, sowing seeds of doubt and distrust. She told them of his ambition, his ruthlessness, his willingness to sacrifice them for his own ends. She showed them how he was leading them to their destruction. It was a dangerous game of whispers and shadows, but Alara was a quick learner. She had spent her life in the archives, studying the Brotherhood's history. She knew how power worked, and she would use that knowledge to save the Brotherhood from itself. The final confrontation came in the new ledger chamber, the heart of Lorenzo's power. Alara had gathered her allies, a small group of reformers who had finally found the courage to act. They entered the chamber to find Lorenzo alone, standing on the balcony, watching the scribes below. "It's over, Lorenzo," Alara said, her voice echoing in the vast room. "We know what you have done. We know about assassinations, betrayals, the lies. We will not let you destroy the Brotherhood." Lorenzo turned, a look of surprise on his face. He had underestimated her. "You think you can stop me?" he said with a sneer. "I am the Brotherhood. I built this. I control this. You are nothing." "You are a cancer," Alara replied, "and we are here to cut you out." The two factions faced each other, the idealists against the pragmatists, the servants against the masters. The future of the Brotherhood would be decided in this room, not by votes or tribunals, but by force. Lorenzo's guards moved to protect him, but they were outnumbered. Alara's allies, armed with the courage of their convictions, were ready to fight. The battle for the soul of the Brotherhood had begun. The day of the election arrived with a gray dawn and a cold wind that swept through the imperial capital. The 7 electors gathered in the ancient hall where emperors had been chosen for centuries. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting past glories, past emperors, past moments of decision that had shaped the fate of nations. Today, another such moment had arrived. The electors sat in their high-backed chairs, arranged in a semicircle, their faces masked of solemnity and calculation. Each man knew that his vote would be scrutinized, debated, and remembered for generations. Each man carried the weight of the scandal that had engulfed the election, the accusations of bribery and corruption that had tainted them all. And each man knew that, regardless of whom they chose, they would be judged. Archbishop Friedrich sat with his hands folded in prayer, his face pale and drawn. He had not slept in days, tormented by the choice before him. He had accepted the Brotherhood's gold, yes, but he had done so believing it was for greater good. Now, with the scandal exposed, with his name dragged through the mud, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to turn back. He would vote for Alaric, as he had promised. He would keep his word, even if it damned him. The Margrave of Brandenburg sat with a smug expression, unbothered by the scandal. He had been bought, and he was comfortable with that fact. Politics was a dirty business, and he had long ago made peace with the compromises it required. He would vote for Alaric, collect his pension, and sleep soundly at night. The Duke of Saxony, the one elector who had refused the Brotherhood's overtures, sat apart from the others, his face a mask of contempt. He would vote for Theron, and he would do so proudly, defiantly. He was the only one among them who could claim to be uncorrupted, and he wore that distinction like armor. The other electors sat in various states of anxiety, resignation, and calculation. The vote was about to begin, and the fate of an empire hung in the balance. The voting process was formal, ritualistic, designed to lend gravitas to the moment. Each elector, in turn, rose from his seat, approached the central altar, and placed a sealed ballot into an ancient silver urn. The ballots were anonymous, a tradition meant to protect the electors from external pressure, though everyone in the room knew that anonymity was fiction. The Brotherhood knew how each man would vote. Theron knew. The entire empire knew. One by one, the electors cast their votes. The archbishop, his hand trembling, placed his ballot in the urn and returned to his seat, his eyes downcast. The Margrave, with a casual shrug, did the same. The Duke of Saxony cast his vote with a defiant flourish, his message clear. He would not be bought. When the last vote had been cast, the ballots were counted by a panel of neutral clerics, men sworn to secrecy and impartiality. The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Minutes passed like hours. And then finally, the chief cleric stepped forward and announced the result. By a vote of 4-3, he declared, his voice echoing in the vast hall, Prince Alaric is elected Holy Roman Emperor. A murmur ran through the assembled witnesses. It was the narrowest of victories, a single vote separating triumph from disaster. The Brotherhood had won, but barely, and the cost of that victory was written on the faces of the electors, on the faces of the people gathered outside the hall, on the very stones of the ancient building. Alaric, who had been waiting in an antechamber, was summoned. He entered the hall, his face a mixture of joy and disbelief. He was young, handsome, charismatic, the very image of a noble prince. But as he looked at the electors, at the men who had chosen him, he saw not loyalty, but fear. Not respect, but resentment. He had won the crown, but he had not won their hearts. He was an emperor, but he was also a puppet. And somewhere, in the shadows, the puppet masters were pulling the strings. In Antwerp, Lorenzo received the news of Alaric's victory with quiet, controlled satisfaction. He had done it, against all odds, against exposure and scandal and opposition. He had placed his chosen candidate on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. It was the greatest achievement of his life, the culmination of years of planning and sacrifice. He allowed himself a moment of triumph, a small smile, before turning his attention to the next phase of the plan. The inner council convened to celebrate, but the mood was subdued. They had won, yes, but the victory felt hollow. They had been exposed. Their methods had been laid bare for all to see. They were no longer the invisible guardians of the innocent. They were known, feared, and hated. The Brotherhood's reputation, which was carefully cultivated over decades, had been shattered in a matter of weeks. "We have won the battle," the Grand Master said, his voice weary. "But I fear we have lost the war. The people know who we are now. They know what we have done. We will be hunted, opposed, resisted at every turn. This victory may be the beginning of our end, or it may be the beginning of our true power," Lorenzo countered. "Yes, we have been exposed, but we have also demonstrated our reach, our resources, our ability to shape the world. Emperors and kings will now know that we exist, that we are a force to be reckoned with. Some will fear us, some will seek to destroy us, but others will seek to ally with us, to use our power for their own ends. We have entered a new era, and we must adapt." Alara, sitting silently in the corner, listened to Lorenzo's words and felt a deep, abiding despair. He did not see the danger. He did not understand that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. He saw only opportunity, only power, only the next move in his endless game. The Brotherhood had won the election, but in doing so, it had lost its soul, and she feared that no amount of power could ever fill that void. Emperor Alaric's coronation was a grand affair, a spectacle of pageantry and tradition designed to awe the masses and legitimize his rule. He wore the ancient crown, held the sacred scepter, and swore the oaths that bound him to his people and to God. He looked every inch at the emperor, noble and resplendent, but beneath the finery, beneath the ceremony, he was a man in chains. 3 days after his coronation, he received a visit from Lorenzo. The meeting was private, held in the emperor's personal chambers, away from the eyes of the court. Lorenzo arrived with a small retinue of advisors and a large ledger, the physical manifestation of Alaric's debt. "Your Majesty," Lorenzo began, his tone respectful but firm, "I come to discuss the terms of our partnership." "Partnership?" Alaric repeated, his voice uncertain. "I thought you were supporters of my cause, benefactors who believed in my vision for the empire." "We are," Lorenzo said smoothly, "but support and benefaction are not free, Your Majesty. We have invested a great deal in your success. Gold, resources, political capital, and now it is time to discuss the return on that investment." He opened the ledger, revealing page after page of detailed financial records. "This is what we spent to secure your election. The bribes to the electors, the propaganda campaigns, the operational expenses. The total comes to just over 2 million florins." Alaric's face went pale. 2 million? That is more than the imperial treasury holds in a year. "Indeed," Lorenzo said, "which is why we do not expect immediate repayment in gold. Instead, we propose a different arrangement." He produced a document, a contract written in precise legal language. "We ask for certain concessions. Control over the silver mines in the western marches, which you now rule. exclusive trading rights in several key ports, the appointment of Brotherhood-approved advisors to key positions in your government, and a seat on your imperial council so that we may offer our counsel on matters of state. Alaric stared at the document, his hands trembling. You want to control my empire. We want to help you rule it, Lorenzo corrected. You are young, inexperienced. You have enemies on all sides. We can protect you, guide you, ensure that your reign is long and prosperous. All we ask in return is a voice in your decisions. Is that not a fair exchange? Alaric wanted to refuse. Every instinct, every shred of pride screamed at him to throw Lorenzo out, to tear up the contract, to assert his independence. But he was not a fool. He knew the reality of his situation. He had won the election by the narrowest of margins, and his support among the electors was fragile at best. He had enemies in Duke Theron, who would not accept defeat quietly. He had enemies among the nobility, who resented his youth and his lack of experience. And he had no money, no army, no resources to defend himself. The Brotherhood, for all their manipulation, for all their corruption, were the only allies he had. They had wealth, the intelligence network, the political connections that he desperately needed. To refuse them would be to stand alone, and he knew he could not survive alone. What guarantee do I have, he asked slowly, that you will not simply use me as a puppet? That you will not make decisions in my name without my consent? You have our word, Lorenzo said. And more than that, you have our interest. We do not want a weak emperor, your majesty. We want a strong one who can bring stability and prosperity to the empire. But strength requires support, and support requires trust. We are offering you both. All we ask is that you trust us in return. Alaric looked at the contract again, at the long list of concessions, at the price of his crown. He thought of his dreams, his vision of a just and noble empire. He thought of the founder's ideals, the principles he had sworn to uphold, and he realized, with a sinking heart, that those dreams were already dead. He had sold them, piece by piece, to win the throne. Now he was simply paying the bill. He picked up a quill, dipped it in ink, and signed the contract. I accept your terms, he said, his voice hollow. May God forgive me. Lorenzo took the contract, a faint smile on his lips. God will forgive you, your majesty. History will remember you as a great emperor, and we will make sure of that. He bowed and left, leaving Alaric alone in his chambers, staring at his hands, wondering what he had become. News of the contract spread quickly through the Brotherhood's network. Lorenzo had secured not just an election, but an empire. The Brotherhood now had direct control over vast resources, strategic positions, and the ear of the most powerful man in Europe. It was a triumph beyond their wildest dreams, a validation of Lorenzo's vision and strategy. But not everyone celebrated. In the archives, Elara read the terms of the contract with a growing sense of horror. This was not partnership. This was conquest. The Brotherhood had not helped Alaric win the throne. They had bought it, and now they owned it. And by extension, they owned the empire. She added the contract to her secret file, the growing catalog of the Brotherhood's sins. It was damning evidence, proof that they had become exactly what Valerius had been, a power that controlled from the shadows, that put its own interests above those of the people it claimed to serve. She knew that one day, this evidence would be used to hold them accountable. She just hoped that day would come before it was too late. In Vienna, Duke Theron received word of the contract through his own intelligence network. He read it with a cold, calculating fury. He had lost the election, but the war was far from over. The Brotherhood had overreached. They had made themselves visible, vulnerable, and he would exploit that vulnerability. He summoned Lucian, his spy master. The Brotherhood has made a fatal mistake, he said. They have tied themselves to Alaric publicly and irrevocably. If we can discredit Alaric, if we can show that he is a puppet of a corrupt organization, we can turn the nobility against him. We can force the electors to reconsider their choice. We can undo this election. It will take time, Lucian warned, and it will be dangerous. The Brotherhood is powerful, and they will not go down without a fight. Then let there be a fight, Theron said, his eyes hard. I have spent my life on battlefields. I am not afraid of war. And this time, the enemy is not an army. It is a shadow, and shadows can be burned away by the light. The game was not over. It had only just begun. With the contract signed, the The Brotherhood's influence spread through the empire like a silent, invisible tide. Lorenzo's hand-picked advisors were installed in key positions, their loyalty sworn not to the emperor, but to the Brotherhood. They were the new power behind the throne, the unseen architects of the empire's future. They began to implement Lorenzo's vision of a stable, prosperous, and centrally controlled empire. They reformed the tax system, making it more efficient and more profitable for the Brotherhood. They standardized weights and measures, facilitating trade and increasing the flow of goods through Brotherhood-controlled ports. They founded a new professional army, loyal to the emperor but trained and equipped by the Brotherhood. On the surface, it was a golden age. The empire was at peace. The economy was booming. The people were, for the most part, content. But beneath the surface, a darker reality was taking shape. The Brotherhood's control was absolute, their methods ruthless. Those who opposed them were silenced, their businesses ruined, their reputations destroyed. The empire was a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but a prison for those who dared to defy its masters. Alara watched it all from her position on the Oversight Committee, a powerless observer to the Brotherhood's slow, inexorable descent into tyranny. She documented every transgression, every abuse of power, every broken promise. Her file grew thicker, heavier, a testament to the Brotherhood's fall from grace. Emperor Alaric sat on his throne, a prisoner in his own palace. He was surrounded by luxury, by ceremony, by the trappings of power. But he was not a ruler. He was a symbol, a figurehead, a puppet whose strings were pulled by Lorenzo and the Brotherhood. He tried to resist, to assert his authority, but he was powerless. His advisors, all Brotherhood men, politely but firmly overruled his decisions. His decrees were rewritten to serve the Brotherhood's interests. His attempts to connect with his people were thwarted, his public appearances carefully managed. He became a lonely, isolated figure, haunted by the choices he had made. He spent his days in endless, meaningless ceremonies, and his nights drinking himself into a stupor, trying to forget the man he had once hoped to be. One evening, he summoned Alara to his chambers. He had heard of her opposition to Lorenzo, of her fight to preserve the Brotherhood's soul. He saw in her a kindred spirit, another idealist trapped in a world of pragmatists. "Tell me," he said, his voice slurred with wine, "was it worth it? Power, wealth, control? Has it made the world a better place?" Alara looked at the broken man before her and felt a surge of pity. "No, Your Majesty," she said softly. "It has not. It has only made the world a more efficient prison." Alaric laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "A prison. Yes, that is what it is. And I am its most gilded prisoner." He raised his cup in a mock toast. "To the Brotherhood. May they enjoy the empire they have bought." Duke Theron, from his stronghold in Vienna, watched the Brotherhood's consolidation of power with a mixture of anger and admiration. They were brilliant, he had to admit. Their methods were ruthless, but their results were undeniable. They had transformed the empire in a matter of months, achieving a level of control that emperors had dreamed of for centuries. But he also saw their weakness. Their power was built on a foundation of lies, of corruption, of fear, and such a foundation could not last. It was brittle, and it would eventually crack. He began to build his own coalition, a league of free states united in their opposition to Alaric and the Brotherhood. He reached out to the other electors who had voted against Alaric, to the powerful nobles who had been sidelined by the Brotherhood's advisors, to the merchant guilds whose businesses had been ruined by the Brotherhood's monopolies. He did not have the Brotherhood's wealth or their vast intelligence network. But he had something more powerful, a cause. He had the truth, and he would use that truth to rally the empire against the shadow that had fallen over it. He launched a propaganda war, a campaign of pamphlets and speeches that exposed the Brotherhood's crimes, that revealed the truth of Alaric's puppet rule, that called on the people to rise up and reclaim their freedom. It was a slow, difficult process, but it began to work. The seeds of rebellion were being sown. The gilded cage was beginning to rust. The first sign of trouble was a failed harvest in the eastern provinces. A long, dry summer had withered the crops in the fields, and the granaries were half empty. It was a local problem, a tragedy for the farmers and villagers of the East, but not a threat to the empire. Or so it seemed. But the Brotherhood, in its quest for efficiency and control, had centralized the empire's food supply. They had created a system of regional granaries managed by Brotherhood officials designed to ensure a stable and predictable flow of grain to the major cities. It was a brilliant system on paper, a model of logistical genius. But it had a fatal flaw. It was inflexible. It was not designed to respond to local crises. When the reports of the failed harvest reached Antwerp, Lorenzo and his advisors saw it not as a humanitarian crisis, but as a financial problem. They were concerned about the impact on grain prices, on their trade routes, on the stability of their investments. They debated, they analyzed, and they ran projections. They did everything but send food. Alara, on the oversight committee, was horrified. She presented reports from the eastern provinces, eyewitness accounts of starvation, of desperation, of people eating grass and roots to survive. "We have to act," she pleaded with the council. "We have the resources. We can send food. We can save these people." But Lorenzo was unmoved. "We cannot disrupt the entire system for a local problem," he said. "It would be inefficient. It would set a dangerous precedent. We will monitor the situation. We will provide aid when it is fiscally responsible to do so." As the Brotherhood debated, the framing worsened. The local problem became a regional crisis. The eastern provinces were consumed by hunger, by disease, by despair, and the people began to die. Duke Theron saw his opportunity. He had been waiting for the Brotherhood to make a mistake, and they had made a catastrophic one. He used his own resources, his own network of loyal nobles and merchants, to organize a massive relief effort. He bought grain from the north, from the south, from wherever he could find it, and sent it to the starving east. It was a logistical nightmare, a race against time. But Theron was a man of action, a man who knew how to get things done. His convoys of food arrived in the eastern provinces like a miracle, a sign that someone cared, that someone was listening. He did not do it out of the goodness of his heart, though he was not an unfeeling man. He did it because it was a brilliant political move. He showed the people of the empire that he, not the emperor, not the Brotherhood, was their true protector. He was showing them that the Brotherhood's system of control was not a shield, but a cage. The contrast was stark. The Brotherhood, with all its wealth and power, debated and dithered while people starved. Duke Theron, with far fewer resources, acted decisively and saved thousands of lives. The propaganda wrote itself. The people of the East, once loyal subjects of the emperor, now saw Theron as their savior. The seeds of rebellion had found fertile ground. The famine was the final straw for Alara. She had watched the Brotherhood's descent into tyranny, had documented their crimes, had fought against their corruption from within. But this was different. This was not about power or politics. This was about human lives, and the Brotherhood had failed, utterly and completely. She knew she could no longer work within the system. The Oversight Committee was a shame, a powerless body designed to create the illusion of accountability. The council was paralyzed, caught between Lorenzo's ambition and the Grand Master's despair. The Brotherhood was morally bankrupt. She went to the archives, to the place where the Brotherhood's true soul still resided. She retrieved the original charter, the document that had been signed by the founders, the one that contained the covenant, the failsafe that had been all but forgotten. She invoked it. She sent a formal notice to the Grand Master and the Council, demanding a secret tribunal to judge the Brotherhood's actions. It was an act of open rebellion, a declaration of war against Lorenzo and everything he stood for. This time, she did not come with arguments and evidence. She came up with a simple, undeniable truth. The Brotherhood had let people die. And for that, they had to be held accountable. The tribunal was convened, not in a secret chamber, but in the new ledger room itself, the heart of Lorenzo's power. The final battle for the soul of the Brotherhood was about to begin. The tribunal was a tense, dramatic affair. The three elders, the same ones who had judged Alara before, now sat in judgment of the entire Brotherhood. Alara, as the accuser, stood before them, her voice clear and unwavering. Lorenzo, as the de facto leader, stood as the accused, his face a mask of cold fury. Alara did not speak of politics or finance. She spoke of the framing. She read the reports from the eastern provinces, the letters from the dying, the accounts of the children who had starved to death while the Brotherhood's granaries were full. She painted a picture of suffering so vivid, so heartbreaking, that even the most hardened members of the council were moved. "This is what we have become," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, righteous anger. "We are a bank that values its investments more than human lives. We are a corporation that prioritizes efficiency over compassion. We are a power that has forgotten its purpose. We have failed the founders. We have failed the people. We have failed ourselves." She then presented her evidence: the records of the full granaries, the minutes of the council meetings where they had debated and delayed, the orders from Lorenzo to prioritize financial stability over humanitarian aid. The case was overwhelming, undeniable. When she finished, the room was silent. The weight of their failure, of their moral bankruptcy, hung in the air like a shroud. There was nothing Lorenzo could say, no argument he could make that could refute the simple, terrible truth. They had let people die. Lorenzo tried to defend himself. He spoke of the complexities of the situation, of the need for long-term stability, of the dangers of rash action. He argued that he had been making the hard choices, the responsible choices, the choices that a true leader must make. He tried to paint Alara as a sentimental idealist who did not understand the realities of power. But his words rang hollow. The images of the starving children, the stories of the desperate villagers, were too powerful to be dismissed by his cold, pragmatic logic. The council, which had once been so swayed by his vision, now looked at him with doubt and disillusionment. The Grand Master, who had been silent for so long, finally spoke. He rose from his chair, his old body frail, but his voice surprisingly strong. "She is right, Lorenzo," he said, his words cutting through the tension in the room. "We have failed. I have failed. I allowed myself to be seduced by your vision of a better world, and I did not see the darkness that came with it. I forgot the most important lesson of our history, that power, no matter how well-intentioned, always corrupts." He turned to the tribunal. "I accept responsibility for our failure. I ask for your judgment not just on Lorenzo but on myself, on this entire council. We have lost our way, and we must find it again, or we are truly lost." It was a stunning moment, a confession from the highest authority in the Brotherhood. The Grand Master had broken, and in doing so, he had broken Lorenzo's hold on power. The tribunal's verdict was swift and decisive. The council was found guilty of gross negligence and the dereliction of its duties. Lorenzo was stripped of his authority, his control over the new ledger revoked. The Grand Master was censured, but allowed to remain as a figurehead. A new council was to be formed, with Alara at its head, tasked with reforming the Brotherhood and returning it to its original principles. It was a revolution, a complete overthrow of the old guard. Alara won. She had saved the Brotherhood from itself. But it was a victory that felt like a defeat. The Brotherhood was in ruins, its reputation destroyed, its power shattered. And outside, Duke Theron and his League of Free States were on the march, ready to pick up the pieces. Alara stood in the new ledger chamber, the room that had once been the symbol of Lorenzo's power, and felt the immense weight of the task before her. She had to rebuild the Brotherhood, to restore its honor, to find a new path forward in a world that now saw them as the enemy. It seemed like an impossible task. But as she looked at the faces of the reformers who had stood with her, at the young members who still believed in the founder's oath, she felt a flicker of hope. They had been through the fire, and they had survived. They were broken, but they were not defeated. The age of the empire was over. The age of service was about to begin. The tribunal's verdict sent shockwaves through the Brotherhood. The old guard was out, the reformers in. Alara, once a marginalized historian, was now the most powerful person in the organization. But it was a power she had never wanted, and it came with a heavy price. The Brotherhood was fractured, its members divided between those who supported the reforms and those who remained loyal to Lorenzo. The new ledger, once a symbol of their strength, was now a source of bitter contention. The reformers wanted to dismantle it, to destroy the power that had corrupted them. The loyalists wanted to preserve it, to use it to fight back against their enemies. Alara, caught in the middle, tried to forge a compromise. The new ledger would be preserved, but its use would be strictly limited to humanitarian aid and self-defense. The Brotherhood would withdraw from politics, from finance, from the game of kings. They would return to their roots. But the compromise satisfied no one. The reformers saw it as a betrayal of their principles. The loyalists saw it as a surrender. The Brotherhood was at war with itself, paralyzed by indecision at the very moment it needed to be strong. And outside, Duke Theron was not waiting. He saw the Brotherhood's internal conflict as an opportunity, a sign of weakness. He accelerated his plans, preparing for a final decisive blow that would not just defeat the Brotherhood, but destroy it. Duke Theron's blow came not on the battlefield, but in the courts of law and public opinion. Armed with the evidence of the Brotherhood's crimes, he launched a series of legal challenges to their authority, their contracts, their very existence. He argued that they were a criminal organization, a secret label that had illegally seized power, and that all their assets should be forfeited. He had a powerful case, and he made it with skill and passion. The people, already outraged by the famine and the scandal, rallied to his cause. The nobility, eager to reclaim the power they had lost, supported him. The emperor, a puppet no longer, saw a chance to regain his independence and threw his weight behind Theron. One by one, the Brotherhood's assets were seized. Their mines were nationalized. Their trading rights were revoked. Their advisors were expelled from the imperial court. The empire they had built was dismantled piece by piece before their eyes. Lorenzo watched it all from his self-imposed exile, a bitter, broken man. He had been right, he told himself. He had seen the future. He had built an empire, and now the idealists, the sentimentalists, fools like Alara had destroyed it. They had chosen honor over power, and now they had neither. He did not see his own role in the disaster, his own ambition, his own ruthlessness. He saw only the failure of others, the triumph of his enemies, and he began to plot his revenge. Alara, as the new leader of the Brotherhood, was forced to preside over its dissolution. She negotiated the terms of their surrender, a humiliating agreement that stripped them of their wealth, their power, and their influence. The Brotherhood was allowed to continue to exist, but only as a small, charitable organization, subject to the oversight of the Emperor and the Imperial Council. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Alara knew it was necessary. The Brotherhood had to be humbled, to be broken, to be reborn. They had to learn the lesson that Valerius had learned, that power was a poison, and that the only antidote was service. She addressed the remaining members of the Brotherhood, her voice filled with a quiet, determined hope. "We have lost our empire," she said. "We have lost our wealth. We have lost our power. But we have not lost our soul. We have a chance to start again, to be what we were always meant to be, a brotherhood of servants, dedicated to protecting the innocent and defying the darkness. It will be a long and difficult road, but it is the only road worth taking." Some members left, unable to accept the new reality. But many stayed, inspired by Alara's vision, by her courage, by her unwavering faith in the Brotherhood's true purpose. They were a smaller, poorer, weaker organization, but they were also purer, stronger, more united than they had been in a generation. The age of the Empire was over. The age of service had begun. Emperor Alaric, freed from the Brotherhood's control, found himself in a gilded cage of a different sort. He was no longer a puppet, but he was also not a master. The power he had once dreamed of was now in the hands of Duke Theron, the man who had saved him from the Brotherhood, but who now expected his loyalty in return. Theron was a different kind of master than Lorenzo. He was not interested in contracts or concessions. He was interested in power, pure and simple. He had become the Lord Protector of the Empire, the de facto ruler, and Alaric was once again a figurehead, a symbol of an authority that was not his own. Alaric had traded one master for another. He had escaped the Brotherhood's web only to be caught in Theron's. He was a young man who had been used and discarded by forces far greater than himself. And he was consumed by a bitter, impotent rage. He began to drink heavily, to neglect his duties, to lash out at those around him. He was a broken man, a ghost haunting the halls of his own palace. He had won the crown, but he had lost everything else. One night, in a drunken rage, he summoned his guards and ordered them to arrest Theron. It was a foolish, desperate move, and it failed. Theron's own guards, more numerous and more loyal, easily overpowered the Emperor's men. Theron himself was not even in the palace. He had been warned of the plot by his own spies. Theron arrived at the palace the next morning, his face a mask of cold fury. He did not bother with the formalities of court. He strode into the emperor's chambers and found Alaric slumped in a chair, still drunk from the night before. "You are a fool," Theron said, his voice dripping with contempt. "A weak, pathetic, drunken fool. I saved you from the Brotherhood. I gave you a chance to be a real emperor. And this is how you repay me." Alaric looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "You did not save me," he slurred. "You replaced them. You are no better than they are. You are just another tyrant, another man who craves power." Theron slapped him across the face, the sound echoing in the silent room. "I am the man who is holding this empire together. I am the man who is protecting it from the chaos that you and your Brotherhood friends unleashed. And I will not be undermined by a spoiled child who thinks he is entitled to a crown he did not earn." He leaned closely, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "You will do as I say. You will sign the decrees I put before you. You will be the emperor I tell you to be. And if you ever defy me again, I will not be as merciful as the Brotherhood was. I will have you executed for treason, and I will take the crown for myself. Do you understand me?" Alaric, sobered by the slap and the threat, could only nod. He was trapped. There was no escape. The gilded cage had become a death row. Alara, from her new, humbler position as the leader of a charitable organization, watched the drama in the imperial court with a sense of sad inevitability. The cycle was beginning again. The Brotherhood's fall had created a power vacuum, and Theron had filled it. The Empire had traded a secret master for a public one, a cabal of manipulators for a single ruthless dictator. She knew the Brotherhood had a role to play in the new reality, but she was not sure what it was. They could not fight Theron directly. They did not have the power, and they had sworn off political intervention. But they could not stand by and do nothing while a new tyranny took root. She found her answer in the archives, in the writings of the founders. They had faced a similar dilemma, a world ruled by tyrants and warlords, and they had found a way to fight back, not with armies or wealth, but with knowledge, with truth, with hope. They had become the unseen shield, the silent guardians of the innocent. They had built networks of spies and informants, not to control, but to protect. They had used their knowledge to expose corruption, to warn of impending attacks, to give the powerless a fighting chance. Alara knew this was the path the Brotherhood had to take again. They would not be players in the game of kings. They would be the watchers on the wall, the keepers of the flame, the whisper of conscience in a world that had lost its way. It was a long, slow, thankless task, but it was their task. It was their oath, and they would not fail again. 5 years have passed. The Brotherhood, under Alara's leadership, slowly, painstakingly rebuilt itself. They were no longer a power in the world of politics and finance. They were a network of scholars, healers, and spies dedicated to the service of the common people. They operated in the shadows, their work unseen, their successes uncelebrated. They smuggled food to starving villages, provided medicine to plague-ridden cities, and helped refugees escape from war-torn lands. They were a whisper of hope in a world that was growing darker. Duke Theron, now the undisputed ruler of the Empire, had become the very thing he had once fought against. He was a tyrant, his rule absolute, his methods brutal. He had brought stability to the Empire, but at the cost of freedom. The gilded cage was stronger than ever. And then a new crisis emerged. A plague more virulent than any seen in a generation swept through the Empire. It began in the east and spread like wildfire, overwhelming the local authorities, the imperial government, the church. The Empire was on the brink of collapse. Theron, for all his power, was helpless. He could not fight a disease with armies. He could not intimidate a plague with threats. He was a man who knew only how to control, and this was a force he could not control. In his desperation, Theron remembered the Brotherhood. He remembered their efficiency, their resources, their ability to get things done. He had destroyed their power, but he knew they still existed, a shadow of their former selves. He sent a secret emissary to Alara, a plea for help. "The Empire is dying," the emissary said. "We need your help. We need your knowledge, your networks, your resources. Help us fight this plague, and the Duke will restore your status. He will give you back your wealth, your power, your influence. He will make you partners in the Empire once again." It was a tempting offer. It was a chance to regain everything they had lost, to become a power in the world once more. The old guard, the remnants of Lorenzo's faction, urged Alara to accept. This is our chance, they argued, our chance to be relevant again. But Alara refused. We will help, she said. We will do everything in our power to fight this plague, but we will not do it for power. We will not do it for wealth. We will do it because it is our duty. We are servants, not partners. We will accept no reward, no restoration of our status. We will do the work, and then we will disappear back into the shadows. It was a test, and Alara knew it. A test of their new principles, of their commitment to service, and she would not fail it. The Brotherhood's response to the plague was a masterpiece of logistics and compassion. Their agents, using the knowledge and networks they had built over the years, were able to track the spread of the disease, to identify the most effective treatments, to organize the distribution of food and medicine to the hardest-hit areas. They worked tirelessly, selflessly, without recognition. They were the doctors in the plague hospitals, the volunteers who buried the dead, the smugglers who brought supplies through quarantined cities. They were the unseen shield, protecting the people from a foe that their own government could not defeat. And slowly, miraculously, the tide began to turn. The plague began to recede. The death toll fell. The empire began to heal. Theron watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and fear. He was grateful for the Brotherhood's help, for they had saved his empire. But he was also afraid of them. He did not understand them. He did not understand their motives, their selflessness, their refusal to accept a reward. He had offered them power, and they had refused it. He had offered them wealth, and they had turned it down. They were a force he could not control, a power he could not comprehend, and that made them more dangerous than any army, any rival, any enemy he had ever faced. The Brotherhood was back, not as a power, but as an idea, and an idea he knew was much harder to kill. Lorenzo, living in exile in a small, remote villa, heard the news of the Brotherhood's triumph over the plague with a bitter, twisted smile. They had succeeded where he had failed. They had saved the empire, not with power and control, but with service and sacrifice. And in doing so, they had proven him wrong. He had spent the last 5 years in a state of angry denial, convinced that he had been right, that his vision had been the only way. He had written a long, rambling memoir, a justification of his actions, a condemnation of his enemies. He had plotted his return to power, his revenge against Alara and the reformers who had betrayed him. But now, with the news of the plague, with the story of the Brotherhood's selfless service spreading across the empire, he felt the foundations of his anger begin to crumble. He began to see the truth of what he had become, the monster he had created. He began to see the wisdom in Alara's words, the truth in the founder's oath. He was an old man now, his body frail, his mind still sharp, and he knew he did not have much time left. He wanted to do one last thing, one final act to atone for his sins, to leave a different kind of legacy. He burned his memoir, the pages of self-justification turning to ash in the fireplace. And then he began to write something new. Not a defense of his actions, but a confession. Lorenzo's confession was a remarkable document. It was a full and honest accounting of his time as the leader of the Brotherhood, a detailed chronicle of his ambition, his methods, his crimes. He spared no one, least of all himself. He wrote of bribes, the assassinations, the betrayals. He wrote of his lust for power, his belief that the ends justified the means, his slow, inexorable descent into tyranny. But it was more than just a confession. It was also a warning to future generations of the Brotherhood, a warning about the dangers of power, the seductive allure of control, the ease with which good intentions can be corrupted. I believed I was building a better world, he wrote. I believed I was serving the greater good, but I was blind. I was so focused on the grand design that I could not see the human cost. I traded compassion for efficiency, and in doing so, I betrayed everything the Brotherhood stands for. Do not make mistakes. Remember that we are servants, not masters. Remember that our power lies not in our wealth or our influence, but in our humility, in our compassion, in our unwavering commitment to the innocent. That is our true strength. That is our only hope. He sent the confession to Alara with a simple note. Do with this what you will. I trust your judgment. It was an act of surrender, an act of faith, an act of redemption. Alara received Lorenzo's confession with a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the man he had been, for the potential he had wasted, for the damage he had done, and relief that in the end he had found his way back to the truth. She knew the confession was a powerful weapon. She could use it to destroy Lorenzo's remaining loyalists, to solidify her own power, to ensure that the Brotherhood never again strayed from its path. But she also knew that was not what Lorenzo would have wanted. And it was not what the Brotherhood needed. Instead, she chose to use the confession not as a weapon, but as a teaching tool. She added it to the archives, to the collection of the Brotherhood's histories, to be read by every new initiate, every future leader. It would stand as a permanent reminder of their near destruction, a cautionary tale of the dangers of power. Lorenzo died a few weeks later, alone in his villa. He was not remembered as a great leader or a visionary architect. He was remembered as a man who had lost his way, and then at the very end, had found it again. His legacy was not the empire he had built, but the warning he had left behind. A warning that would help the Brotherhood stay true to its path for generations to come. Years turned into decades. The Brotherhood, under Alara's wise and steady leadership, continued its work in the shadows, a silent, unseen force for good in the world. They were no longer a power, but they had a different kind of influence. An influence built on trust, on respect, on the quiet, consistent demonstration of their commitment to service. Duke Theron, the man who had once been their greatest enemy, grew old and died. His son, a weaker, less competent man, inherited the throne. The empire, which had been held together by Theron's iron will, began to fracture. The old rivalries, the old conflicts, the old ambitions re-emerged. The cycle of power and chaos began again. But this time, the Brotherhood was not a player in the game. They were the watchers, the guardians, the ones who protected the innocent from the fallout of the powerful, endless struggles. They were the unseen shield. Alara, now an old woman herself, spent her final years in the archives, writing the history of her time, the story of the Brotherhood's fall and rebirth. It was a story she knew had to be told, a lesson that had to be remembered. Power is a fire, she wrote. It can warm and it can destroy. The test of any person, of any organization, is not whether they seek power, but how they use it. We failed that test once, we must never fail it again. One day, a young initiate came to Alara in the archives. Her name was Sophia, and she was a brilliant, ambitious young woman who reminded Alara of a young Lorenzo. She was full of ideas, of plans, of a desire to do good on a grand scale. I have been reading the histories, Sophia said, her eyes shining with passion. And I have an idea, a way for the Brotherhood to have a greater impact, to do better. We have resources, knowledge, the networks. We could be more than just a charity. We could be a force for change. Alara looked at the young woman and saw the future of the Brotherhood, the eternal struggle between idealism and pragmatism, between service and control. She knew that this was a conversation that would be repeated and again in every generation if the Brotherhood existed. She did not rebuke Sophia. She did not dismiss her ideas. Instead, she smiled, a wise, gentle smile. "Come," she said, "let me show you something." She led Sophia to a small, locked room in the back of the archives. She opened the door, revealing a single document preserved under glass. It was Lorenzo's confession. "Read this," Alara said. "Read it, and then we will talk about your ideas." Sophia spent the rest of the day in that small, quiet room, reading Lorenzo's confession. She read of his ambition, his brilliance, his vision. She read of his methods, his compromises, his crimes. She read of his fall, his exile, his final, heartbreaking repentance. When she emerged from the room, the sun was setting, and her eyes were red with tears. She found Alara sitting in her study, waiting for her. "I understand," Sophia said, her voice barely a whisper. "I understand now." "What do you understand?" Alara asked gently. "The danger," Sophia said. "The temptation. The ease with which we can lose our way." I saw myself in him, in his desire to do good, in his belief that he knew best. And it terrified me. "Good," Alara said. "That fear is a healthy one. It is a fear that will keep you honest. It is a fear that will keep us all safe." She stood and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "You are a leader, Sophia. You have a great future in this Brotherhood. But you must always remember the lessons of the past. You must always remember Lorenzo." and you must always, always choose service over control. Sophia nodded, her eyes filled with a new, more sober understanding. The cycle would continue. The temptation would always be there. But now, she had the wisdom to resist it. The Brotherhood was in good hands. 5 years after the Brotherhood's expulsion from the imperial court, a new crisis arose. A plague, more virulent than any seen in a generation, swept through the empire. It began in the eastern provinces and spread like wildfire, overwhelming the local authorities and the imperial government. The empire, already weakened by political instability, was on the brink of collapse. Emperor Alaric, now a more mature and sober ruler, found himself helpless. He had the power of the state, but he could not command a disease to retreat. He remembered the Brotherhood, their efficiency, their resources, their ability to get things done. He had been their puppet, but he had also seen their competence. He sent a secret enemy to Alara, who was now the respected, if not powerful, leader of the Brotherhood. The message was a plea for help. "The empire is dying," the emissary said. "We need your knowledge, your networks, your resources. Help us fight this plague, and the emperor will restore your status. He will give you back your wealth, your power, your influence. He will make you partners in the empire once again." It was a tempting offer, a chance to regain everything they had lost. The remnants of Lorenzo's faction urged Alara to accept. But Alara, guided by the lessons of the past, refused. "We will help," she said, "but not for power, not for wealth. We will do it because it is our duty. We are servants, not partners. We will accept no reward. We will do the work, and then we will disappear back into the shadows." The Brotherhood's response to the plague was a masterpiece of logistics and compassion. Their agents, using the knowledge and networks they had built over the years, were able to track the spread of the disease, to identify the most effective treatments, to organize the distribution of food and medicine to the hardest-hit areas. They worked tirelessly, selflessly, without recognition. They were the doctors in the plague hospitals, the volunteers who buried the dead, the smugglers who brought supplies through quarantined cities. They were the unseen shield, protecting the people from a foe that their own government could not defeat. And slowly, miraculously, the tide began to turn. The plague began to recede. The death toll fell. The empire began to heal. Alaric watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and awe. He was grateful for the Brotherhood's help, for they had saved his empire. But he was also in awe of them. He did not understand their motives, their selflessness, their refusal to accept a reward. He had offered them power, and they had refused it. He had offered them wealth, and they had turned it down. They were a force he could not control, a power he could not comprehend. And that made them more dangerous and more admirable than any army, any rival, any enemy he had ever faced. The Brotherhood was back, not as a power, but as an idea. And an idea, he knew, was much harder to kill. When the plague had finally passed, Alaric summoned Alara to the palace. He did not offer her a seat on the council or control over the mines. He offered her something far more valuable, his trust. "I do not understand you," he said, his voice filled with a genuine, searching curiosity. "But I respect you. You have saved my empire, and you have asked for nothing in return. You have shown me what true service looks like. And I want to learn from you." He proposed a new partnership, not one based on contracts and concessions, but on shared values and mutual respect. He asked the Brotherhood to be his secret advisors, his conscience, his eyes and ears in the empire. He asked them to help him be a better emperor. Alara, after consulting with the council, accepted. It was a new role for the Brotherhood, a new kind of influence. They would not be puppet masters, but they would not be passive observers either. They would be partners in the truest sense of the word, working with the emperor to build a more just and compassionate world. It was the beginning of a new golden age for the Brotherhood, an age of service, of influence, of purpose. They had been through the fire, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to their sacred oath. Years later, when Grandmaster Theron passed away, the Brotherhood Council convened to choose his successor. The choice was clear and unanimous: Alara. She had led them through their darkest hour, reformed their institution, and restored their honor. She was the natural choice to lead them into the future. But Alara refused. "I am a historian, a keeper of the flame," she told the council. I am not a leader. The Brotherhood needs someone who understands the world of power, but who has also learned the lessons of its abuse. There is only one person who fits that description. She nominated Lorenzo. The council was stunned. Lorenzo, the man who had nearly destroyed them? The man who had been stripped of his power and sent into exile? It was unthinkable, but Alara was persuasive. Lorenzo has changed, she argued. He has seen the error of his ways. He has confessed his sins. He has spent years in quiet contemplation, reflecting on his failures. He understands the dangers of power better than anyone. And he is the only one among us who has the skills, the knowledge, the experience to lead us in this new era. It was a radical idea, a leap of faith. But the council, trusting Alara's judgment, agreed. They sent an emissary to Lorenzo's villa, offering him the position of Grand Master. Lorenzo was shocked by the offer. He had expected to live out his days in exile, a forgotten relic of a failed era. He had never imagined he would be welcomed back into the Brotherhood, let alone offered its highest position. He was tempted to refuse. He was an old man. He was tired. He had no desire to return to the world of power and politics. But he also felt a sense of duty, a responsibility to the organization he had nearly destroyed. He had a chance to make amends, to use his skills for good, to leave a different kind of legacy. He accepted the offer, but on one condition. I will be the Grand Master, he told the council. But Alara will be my partner. We will rule together as equals. My pragmatism and her idealism, my knowledge of the world and her knowledge of our history. Together, we can keep the Brotherhood on the right path. The council agreed. And so the two former rivals, the architect and the idealist, became partners. It was an unlikely alliance, but a powerful one. They were the two halves of the Brotherhood's soul, the yin and the yang, the sword and the shield. And together, they were whole. Lorenzo and Alara led the Brotherhood for 2 decades, a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity for the organization and for the empire. They were a perfect team, their strengths complementing each other, their weaknesses balanced by the other's wisdom. Lorenzo, with his deep understanding of finance and politics, guided the Brotherhood's work in the world, ensuring that their resources were used effectively, that their interventions were strategic and successful. But he did so with a newfound humility, a constant awareness of the dangers of his own ambition. Alara, with her deep knowledge of the Brotherhood's history and her unwavering commitment to its principles, served as the organization's conscience, ensuring that they never again lost their way. She was the keeper of the flame, the guardian of their soul. Together, they transformed the Brotherhood. They were no longer a secret society, but a respected institution. They were no longer a power, but they had a profound influence. They were the trusted advisors of emperors, the champions of the poor, the guardians of justice in a world that was often unjust. When Lorenzo finally died, he was not remembered as the man who had built an empire, but as the man who had learned to serve. And that, he would have said, was a far greater legacy. After Lorenzo's death, Alara continued to lead the Brotherhood, a wise and beloved Grand Master. She oversaw a period of quiet, steady growth, expanding the Brotherhood's network of schools, hospitals, and relief agencies. The Brotherhood became a global force for good, its influence felt in every corner of the world. But they never again sought power. They never again played the game of kings. They remained true to their oath, to their commitment to service. They were the unseen shield, protecting the innocent from the shadows. One day, a young historian came to Alara, seeking to write the definitive history of the Brotherhood. He asked her for access to the archives, to the secret records of their past. Alara, after much consideration, agreed. The world should know our story, she said. They should know of our triumphs and our failures, of our fall and our redemption. They should know that even the best of intentions can be corrupted, and that even the most corrupted can find their way back to the light. She gave him everything: the journals of the founders, the records of the new ledger, Lorenzo's confession. Tell the truth, she said, all of it. The world needs to know. The historian spent years in the archives, piecing together the story of the Brotherhood. It was a story of power and corruption, of idealism and betrayal, of failure and redemption. It was the story of the human heart, in all its complexity, in all its contradictions. His book, when it was finally published, was a sensation. It was read by kings and commoners, by scholars and soldiers, by everyone who was interested in the nature of power and the struggle for a better world. It became a classic, a timeless tale of the eternal battle between good and evil, between the light and the darkness. And it ensured that the Brotherhood's story, its lessons, would never be forgotten. Alara lived to see the book published, to see the story of her life, of her struggle, told to the world. She died peacefully in her sleep a few months later, her work complete, her legacy secure. She was remembered as the woman who had saved the Brotherhood, the woman who had reminded them of their soul. She was the keeper of the flame, the guardian of the oath, the unseen shield that had protected them all. The Brotherhood continued, generation after generation, a quiet, constant presence in the world. They were not always perfect. They made mistakes. They faced new challenges, new temptations, but they never again lost their way. The lessons of the past were too deeply ingrained in their culture, in their history, in their very soul. They remained the unseen shield, the silent guardians, the keepers of the flame. They were a whisper of hope in a world that was often dark, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, a small group of dedicated individuals could make a difference. And in the archives, in a small, locked room, Lorenzo's confession remained, a permanent warning, a timeless lesson, a testament to the man who had almost destroyed them and then, in the end, had helped to save them. It was his true legacy, a legacy of failure, of redemption, of hope, a legacy that was in its own way as powerful as any empire. 100 years later, a new initiative stood before the council, ready to take her oath. Her name was Sophia, and she was a brilliant, ambitious young woman, full of ideas and a burning desire to change the world. She reminded the Grand Master of a young Alara and a young Lorenzo. Before she took her oath, she was sent to the archives to spend a day reading the histories of the Brotherhood. She read of the founders of Valerius, of Lorenzo and Alara. She read of their triumphs and their failures, their moments of glory and their moments of shame. She spent the longest time in the small, locked room, reading Lorenzo's confession. She read it once, and then she read it again, the words burning themselves into her memory. When she emerged from the archives, her eyes were filled with a new understanding, a new sobriety. She understood the weight of the oath she was about to take, the responsibility that came with it. She stood before the council, her voice clear and strong, and swore to protect the innocent, to defy the darkness, and to serve the people, not herself. The cycle continued. The flame passed, the Brotherhood endured. In the imperial capital, a new emperor sat on the throne, a young, ambitious man who dreamed of restoring the empire to its former glory. He was a student of history, and he had read the story of the Brotherhood. He knew of their power, their wealth, their influence, and he wanted it for himself. He sent an emissary to the Brotherhood with an offer. "The Emperor wishes to form an alliance," the emissary said. "He recognizes your skills, your resources, your value. He wants to make you partners in his great enterprise. He will restore your status, your wealth, your power. He will give you a seat at the table of history once again." It was the same offer that had been made a century before. The same temptation, the same test. The council, now led by a wise old Grand Master who had been a young man when Alara was a legend, listened patiently. When the emissary had finished, the Grand Master smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "We are honored by the Emperor's offer," he said, "but we must respectfully decline. We are servants, not partners. Our work is in the shadows, not in the halls of power. We wish the Emperor well, but we will walk our own path." The emissary was stunned. He could not understand why they would refuse such an offer. But the Brotherhood understood. They had learned their lesson, and they would not forget it. The historian's book, The Rise and Fall of the Brute Brotherhood, remained a classic, read and studied in universities and courts across the world. It was a story that never grew old, a story that spoke to the eternal struggle between power and principle, between the desire to control and the duty to serve. And in the final chapter, the historian had written a passage that was quoted again, a passage that captured the essence of the Brotherhood's journey, the heart of its legacy. The Brute Brotherhood was not a perfect organization. It was flawed, as all human institutions are flawed. It was tempted by power, and it fell, but it did not stay fallen. It rose again, humbled and transformed. It learned that true strength lies not in controlling the world, but in serving it. It learned that true power lies not in wealth or influence, but in compassion and humility. And in learning that lesson, it became something more than just a secret society. It became an idea that has endured for centuries, a whisper of hope in a world that is often dark. An idea that reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming power, a small group of dedicated individuals can make a difference. An idea that tells us that the unseen shield is, in the end, more powerful than the sharpest sword. The story of the Brute Brotherhood is far from over. This is just one chapter in a 20-book saga that spans centuries, a story of power, corruption, and the eternal struggle for the soul of humanity. To follow the complete journey, to witness the rise and fall of empires, the birth of new legends, and the enduring legacy of the Brotherhood, subscribe to our channel. New chapters in the saga are released every week. Don't miss a single moment of the story that changed the world from the shadows. Subscribe now and become part of the legacy.